We all know that reading is really important, and we definitely try to fit in reading into our homeschools. But is there a difference between reading out loud, or read aloud, versus reading silently with our eyes? Well, research has shown that there is a difference and that reading out loud is quite important. And I'm going to share with you why that is and some tips on how you can improve your read aloud time with your kids. So we all often read out loud to our kids with the expectation that eventually they'll be able to read to themselves silently, and we can just stop that practice altogether. We may even look forward to the time where our kids can just pick up books and read to themselves, and we don't have to be bothered with morning times and read aloud times or even reading stories at bedtime. But there are a lot of research and studies that have shown that continuing to read out loud, even when your children can read for themselves, is very beneficial. And so the research is telling us that reading visually with our eyes is not necessarily the end goal. Of course, we do want our kids to be able to read independently, but reading out loud, even through the high school years, is very beneficial for your children. So studies have shown that grammatically correct, sophisticated language coming through the ears is way better and far more powerful at helping your child learn how to read than any other form of reading. So why is that exactly? Well, in fact, they have found that the better and more proficient you become at reading, the more and more your eyes actually skip over many words and you're absorbing the meaning behind the words, but you are often skipping many words in the passage. For example, they had given a page for several people to read, and they found that when they compared all the passages that people read, many words from every single one of those readers had been left out when they read it. When you read out loud, though, you aren't skipping any words, or we shouldn't be skipping any words, and the child is hearing the grammatical correct, sophisticated language in that correct order. It's going through their ears and into their brain. In fact, reading out loud is the only way that children can get that kind of sophisticated, grammatically correct language. We don't get that by watching TV, and we won't get that by having conversations with others because we just don't speak completely, grammatically, sophisticatedly, correct when we speak. We often leave out words. If you go back and actually listen to a podcast and then read the subtitles underneath, you'll see there's a lot of grammatical errors, and that is because the person actually is missing a lot of words that our brains are still understanding what they're saying, and it may sound highly intelligent, but there are a lot of words being left out when we speak. So tip number 1 is read aloud to your children. Continue reading aloud even when they're able to read on their own. And prioritize reading aloud because you really are benefiting your child almost instantly by allowing them to hear the language that you are reading out loud to them. Now, a lot of homeschooling parents are finding that their kids are just not into read alouds. Maybe they feel they're just not finding the interesting books. Maybe they just can't sit still and they'd rather play and they're not absorbing any of it. But don't let that make you lose hope. Now, this next tip might be a little bit of a tough pill to swallow. It might be that you are struggling with read alouds because you might not be an interesting reader. You might not be dramatic enough. You might not be placing enough inflection and changing the tone and variations of your voice. These are all things that take a lot of practice. And even though you are able to read and you might be understanding very clearly what you're reading, to a listener, if it's a monotone, boring voice, it's hard for those kids to follow along. So what's the solution for that? Because that's a tip just saying, well, give up because you're a boring reader. Well, that's not it. One is keep practicing. And sometimes I find if you over dramatize your voice, you're actually improving it, because you might feel that you're being a bit too overly dramatic or over exaggerated, but it might actually be helping your story, as well as slowing down the pace a little bit, pausing for dramatic effect, and things like that. Now, the other tip is practice so that you can get better yourself. But there is nothing wrong with audiobooks. In fact, Reading Revival recommends using audiobooks because these are highly trained actors, often in audiobooks, that are voice actors narrating each part, and it can be quite exciting and interesting to hear a changed voice for each voice in the story. And so audiobooks shouldn't be disregarded. Some people don't want to do audiobooks because they feel that's not reading. But you're absorbing the sophisticated, grammatically correct language through your ears, and it doesn't have to be you doing the reading. There are some wonderful audiobooks out there that really I enjoy. I recently have been listening to Pride and Prejudice, and all of the voices have different actors, and it's in a British accents, and I'm really enjoying it. It's a lot of fun, and I love to listen to it while I'm cleaning or doing the dishes. Tip number 3 is read alouds don't have to happen every day. Of course, you want them to happen more often than they don't, but don't put the pressure on yourself that you have to squeeze it in every single day, 7 days a week. Even if there was one one blog post that I had read that suggested that reading at least 3 times a week was enough to make reading become a habit. And so if that could be your goal, 3 times a week is pretty achievable. And also, you don't have to read for long periods of time. You don't have to sit and read for an hour and expect your younger children particularly to sit there and listen for that long. You could read for 10 minutes, 15 minutes a day, and that's all you would really have to do to get in that language in through their ears and add to their vocabulary and the richness of the language that they are learning. Now, also, they've said that if you read 10 minutes a day, you will accumulate 70 hours of reading in 1 year. So 10 minutes is not a lot, and I think that's pretty achievable. But could be a goal that you might try to strive for in your homeschool. The next tip is one that really comes from Charlotte Mason. You don't want to waste your read aloud time by just filling them with useless, dumbed down language. And she uses the word twaddle to describe books that are really dumbed down for kids. They're books that have baby talk, that just are these, the dog sat here, or just even those abridged versions that really dumb down the language of the book. You really want to read them the richness of the original language and add to the types of books that they are used to hearing. You don't want to just limit it to, well, my daughter only loves books about unicorns, so I can only read books about unicorns. You want to expand their tastes and interests and love of reading. Now, at first, they might struggle to understand the language, but you will see that over time, they are understanding it more and more and more, and that is what you really want for them. You want them to be able to understand the writing of Jane Austen or Shakespeare or any of those greats, and even there's a lot of modern books that have a great rich writing and language to them. But twaddle, which is just this dumbed down, simplistic way of writing, are not really adding to your child's reading skills and helping them grow in learning how to love reading and literature. And I wanted to give the example of baby talking to young children. When we baby talk to our young children, you find that those children baby talk right back. They never really learn how to eloquently and clearly communicate what they want to say. They just understand communication through baby talk. Well, the same is reading. When you dumb down your reading, they don't learn to expand to read more sophisticated language. They will struggle with it. So the sooner you start to read to them a more highly sophisticated language, the sooner they will be able to grasp that kind of reading. And my final tip, I think it's the 5th tip, is very basic, but in case you haven't thought of it, when I read aloud to my children, I often give them coloring pages. Now I give them coloring pages, not pages to draw. Because when you're drawing and doodling, your mind is thinking. You're thinking about creating. You're thinking about what do you want to draw. And you're thinking more on your art than you are when you're just coloring a page and choosing a color. Your mind can sort of blank out on the coloring and you can tune into the listening. But it really helps children who might have a hard time sitting still and just listening to a story if their hands are able to be busy with something while they are listening to the story. But again, choose things that doesn't require them to have to think about the creating. So sometimes things like Play-Doh is not a good idea because they're thinking about what they want to create, or building blocks and things like that. They're thinking about what they want to create, as opposed to just coloring in a page. It doesn't really require much thought and you can do it while you are listening. And to take it a step further, I often try to find coloring pages related to what I am reading. So if we're reading a book about Shakespeare, I will print out pictures from the plays or a picture of Shakespeare himself and get them to color pictures related to what we are reading about. So they're kind of focused in on those same themes. But that's all I have for you today. I thank you so much for joining me. I hope you found these tips helpful. If you like this video, I ask you to like it and subscribe, and I will be putting out more content like this in the future. Thank you. Bye.